think you can shortcut some of that, because I think
That's
this is, if you see this as a linear approach, right, which is if we learn something bad here, we have to go back and change the whole thing. Of course, if you learned earlier that it wasn't the right approach, you're not losing as much time, you're not losing as much sunk cost.
With adaptive trials, there's lots of other ways it can be.
But think about the provocative thing that the new administration that's coming in the United States has already floated with the FDA, saying that, look, we can fundamentally change about how we can carry on the efficacy and the effectiveness data down the road, and it costs so much tremors throughout the current FDA and the conservative bunch, which says, this is not how we approve drugs. I will not take that drug till it's proven to be efficacious and safe.
But efficacy is a good question, because efficacy
is relative.
It's relative, and 40% of people, it works in approved drugs, right? So that's not really, I think, a good measure.
That's what we were discussing about off the label, the off-label issues.
Exactly.
To what extent will somebody make a killing off of doing data analytics that recognizes that the off-label potential is going to be even bigger?
There are multiple companies doing that today.
Excellent. And
so I think in summary, right? I think in summary, honestly, you started out with saying that this industry is at the threshold of ripe for disruption. And I think the ripe for disruption, to me, again, coming from the background that I come from, you can't take $1 billion, what it takes today, to bring a drug to market with all the onerous requirements, and actually think you can profitably price this in the vast majority of people that cannot afford the day-to-day therapy cost of what a person in Europe or the United States can afford. So when you look at China and when you look at India, and given the prevalence of their numbers, there is absolutely no way you can take a Western-designed healthcare system or R&D and they would go bankrupt. Even China, with all of its trillion dollars in sovereign funds, they would absolutely go bankrupt. So you'll have to think from a disruption standpoint, how do you change the pharma industry so that the R&D costs are not as onerous? How do you create fast killer experiments?
Right.
How do you take data to be able to
I think those are exactly the right questions, because the last thing I want to do if I'm an entrepreneur in China is launch a radio station. I'm not going to compete with Alibaba by launching a radio station or podcasts. I mean, I think what you're saying is exactly right. I think all of the things that make drug and pharma companies successful in OECD countries can't work in India and China. But one thing I can say with a high degree of confidence, having spent time in India and China, is they're not stupid people. They can come up with business models that will kick the crap out of OECD countries. I had a guy who was in Las Vegas. I was running a panel on big data and analytics, and I had a guy from Alibaba there. Alibaba's in a pretty good shape. In terms of, Alibaba said, we're not a gross merchandise value company, we're a data company. The guy's a data scientist, for Columbia educated. Google would be happy to have him. Amazon would be happy to have him. I really wonder whether from India or from China, there's going to be some kind of disruption in pharma or medical devices where the FDA becomes a source of protectionism rather than protecting public safety.
So I'm aware that we've overrun in terms of time. And I'm keen just maybe to do another go around the table and have one question, which is, what should pharma or your organization do differently in 2017? Maybe the one thing that you do differently in this year ahead. Maybe start with you this time, Raj.
Okay. I think in 2017 you'll see our organization being extremely focused, quality over quantity, in terms of doing a few things right rather than doing 250 objectives, which is not something that we're walking away from. But more importantly, I think we're starting to focus not only on the radical innovation side, but more and more on the customer experience part of it. And we're really very focused, because we're in specialty, because we're not in cholesterol or hypertension. We're starting to fundamentally rethink our approach in terms of going to market and how we can use data more intelligently to be able to target our customers better and make sure that the experience at the end of the day, from a pill perspective, is better than what they have currently.
Okay. Robert?
I wouldn't say this would map to us in a way that, do it differently, but I would say continue and really do it, in ways that are truly enabling, and that is that the problems that we've talked about tonight are problems that we need to find a way to readdress. We need to change the nature of what we seek to achieve to problems that we can solve far more readily. And those problems, almost across the board in the things that we seek to do in our industry can be addressed. We'll have to work our way towards many of them in ways that are a little bit more thoughtful than what we know about today, far more effectively as long as we address them earlier. Mm-hmm. So we're not going to live forever. We might, hope to live forever. What we can really hope to have is live far more wonderfully for longer, right? To address the 50 or so diseases that begin to start in our lives when we're typically 40, and find ways to address them far more as a customer-oriented relationship as opposed to a patient-oriented relationship by intercepting them in ways that are going to take medicine into prevention and interception. So it's committing to that. It's committing to understanding the few things, because we won't be able to do this in all the categories, but in the things that we truly understand how we might get ahead of the biology, understand the biomarkers before they are truly at the advanced stages of which it's very hard to turn back, the damage that's been done, and move the agenda and find ways to affordably through lifestyle changes, diet changes, microbiome changes, whatever these things are that are the instigating, along with our genetic susceptibilities, to find ways to change the nature of what it means to have disease and forego it as long as we can and as many people as we can. That's the healthcare of what our children should expect. And it's up to us to get deep enough into the biology of each and every one of these things and what we can learn from treating them to be able to intercept those diseases earlier. So to me, that's what we should strive to do, not just get a little better at treating cancer once people have cancer in the later stages, but get after all of these things before we have a war that's hard to win.
Cool.
I was kind of going to telling me research to help us live forever. Ironically, my suggestion for the most important innovation initiative that pharma and healthcare could do would be design APIs up front for data sets, for devices, for digitally enabled processes, facilitate, encourage, reward, enable, empower interoperability through APIs so that self-organization, cross-functional collaboration, sharing with patients, users, doctors, potential partners isn't a cost, but an opportunity.
I think the major issue the pharmaceutical industry and biopharmaceutical industry is facing in the United States is the whole idea of pricing, all right? And that coming from the section of the industry which purports to make really revolutionary medicines that make a material difference, you have to embrace value-based pricing. We can get into what that means, but priced according to actually making a difference. We have to raise our voice against those who are not being innovative, right, and are increasing their prices just because they can. We have to be very supportive of, at the end of a reasonable monopoly, that there is a healthy generic industry, because society can only afford so much. We have to figure out how to. It was very striking that the liberal Democrats very much are supported by the tech industry, right? A very good relationship, and yet biotech doesn't have the relationship with progressive thinking because somehow we get lumped with the big old bad pharmas, And so somehow getting the disaggregation there, there's the throwaway line, yeah, we support innovation, but, lower prices. And I think we have to make sure we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. I think there's a very recent pricing case last week, which I think was a shooting in the foot.
But if we shoot ourselves in the foot, there's a pill for that.
Sure. Amrit.
I'm thinking about what we want to do differently this coming year. I think it's just fail more. We've done, we're a very young company. We're about 2 years old. And we've done a lot of different things than how the industry's done it historically. And some of them have worked and some haven't. And I'm equally glad about the things we explored, just to rule them out compared to models that have done very, very well. And we have a lot of ideas right now that are within reach of testing out, and I hope we test all of them out. And whether it's applying to supporting different size groups of researchers and scientists, or trying out new models of how collaboration works between larger and smaller companies, something we're working on right now, or really the data issue. We have our own informatics platform we're building just to make it easier for that smaller team to have access to tools that larger groups have bigger relationships, bigger pockets to develop. Some of these are going to fail, some of them aren't, but continuing to fail. That's the exciting part.
Linda?
So I kind of start at the very beginning of all of this, and what we're going to focus on in 2017 is quantifying disease. So I think disease labels are really inadequate, and that's the start of precision medicine, really, is how do we define disease, and if we can contribute that to the pharmaceutical industry, identifying subtypes of many diseases and conditions to really start the segmenting of populations, and we are nowhere near that when you look at something like autism, where it's we call it a spectrum. It's just because we don't know what the subtypes are. So I think our goal is to really start that process and contribute that to make that the pre-competitive part of this, that maybe a pharma wants to pick off the subtypes. That might get us closer to precision medicine, and instead of just focusing on how does a person respond to a drug. That's been the ongoing conversation, personalized medicine with the Harvard program, and I went to that meeting many years and finally just had to stop going because it was the same conversation year after year. But it can't just be about the drug and how a person responds to the drug. It has to be, what disease do I actually have, and how do I contribute that into drug discovery, drug development in a way that now advances it.
And I mean, I think my perspective, and I think it's been a great conversation, to illustrate the point that innovation is not straightforward, and I think the industry struggles because it puts that word on top of everything at the moment with very widely based approaches to that essential problem. I think we need to understand innovation better and what the cultures that drive it are, and actually celebrate people that are good at it. Maybe not blame the ones that aren't, but actually start to understand the processes that lead to it. So I think asking better questions is critical. I think asking better questions of the diseases and of the drugs and so forth is important. I think the most important thing, and it's been echoed time and time again tonight, is the possibilities in our space are growing exponentially. I think having companies understand that and harness that, and understand, I think you mentioned, Steve, the role that individuals have next to innovating is critical for them to understand that it's not somebody else's job to come up with a better idea or to feed it into the organization somewhere, but your role as a regulator or your role as a medic to understand disease, or an epidemiologist, or that possibility gets injected into a collaborative approach to put possibility back into a system. And I think that needs that understanding of a culture of innovation, which is your contribution to the system is critical, and it isn't somebody else's job to feed a better targeted drug into phase 1, but that coming up with a better way to do phase 3 or a better way to come up with a business plan is equally part of that ecosystem of funding to discovery. So I think the complexity that you've all revealed this evening has only added to the conversation. There is no one answer. But thank you all for your contributions, and let's see where we go from here. Let's see what happens next year. Thank you.
Thank you.